We've been asked to speak about doing business in India, the political dimension. Well, India has always been a land of opportunity. British came to India to do business, to trade, and stayed on to run this country, to rule this country for more than 100 years. It has always been a land of plenty, a land of opportunity, where people have always come here and benefited over the past thousands of years. But in the present context, when we talk about doing business in India, we have to then segregate the national business and the international business. For people who don't know this country, who want to come and do business in India, we must understand the psyche, the character, the composition, the culture, the tradition, the diversity, the history of this country. And a country with such diversity, it has 16 official languages, more than 2,000 different dialects. Every 100 kilometers, the dialect changes. Number of different religions, number of sects, subsects, different caste communities. A country which has come into present form only in the last century, and that too, the basic diversity still remains. Although after independence, Pandit Nehru did put us on a sound industrial footing and was instrumental to set up institutions which has withstood the test of time. But I personally feel in the last 50 years, we suffer from overgovernance. We have strengthened the system, but we have not been able to strengthen the people, the democratic setup. We have been running this government the country in a very centralized manner. Even the federal setup that we have, the powers that the government of India has, the states have been agitating for more powers. As it has been seen in the past, slowly the action has transferred to the states, and there is a need for a fresh look in the sharing of power under the Constitution. We are into an era of economic liberalization, and we have been moving now from the era of commanding heights of public sector to economic liberalization. We initiated the process in the late 80s. Unfortunately, Rajiv Gandhi did not live to see the logical conclusion of the economic reforms. But Mr. Narasimha Rao did take the economic reforms ahead and removed regulations, simplified rules, and created more congenial environment for business, for the business community as such. But unfortunately, the civil services that we inherited from the British, which was more trained and motivated to regulate rather than to act as a facilitator, did not really change the mindset. And in spite of the fact, the political decision, the political executive did want to carry on the economic reforms much faster, but left the detailing to the bureaucracy. Of course, there are all kinds of bureaucrats in this country. There are people who are very proactive, pro-reforms, but still there are few, quite a few, who are still sort of have that kind of a mindset which does not encourage the role of facilitator, but more of a regulator. Once Panditji has said that in this country, if the politician starts the process of learning, of saying no. And the bureaucrats, if they learn how to say yes, things would move much faster. This, I think, has been one of the major drawbacks in this country. When you want to do business in India, you must realize that this is a democracy still on the learning curve. 50 years in any democratic country is not a very long time. And I think we have to take into account the diversity of the Indian polity as it stands today. We have to understand that in the recent past, the caste politics has come to fore, and people now are more concerned about the caste of the candidate than the ideology and the social and economic agenda of the political parties. We also to understand that all democracies have gone through this phase, and it takes time for any democracy to mature. The criticism that we invite as it stands today is that there is no consistency in our policy. There is no clarity in vision. Things are inflexible. Corruption is rampant, and there's political instability. Of course, they are interconnected. Political instability leads to wavering in policy, no clarity in vision, and I personally feel that now time has come when the caste and the communal politics in this country has also had its day. People are getting fed up with the caste-based and communal-based politics, and people are moving into issues which are more relevant to the people, the social agenda and the economic agenda. In my own case, as far as Madhya Pradesh is concerned, my community does not even constitute 2% of the population of Madhya Pradesh. And still we have been able to get back in the last election only on the strength of our social and economic agenda and what we performed in the last 5 years. You must also understand the internal contradictions in Indian polity. We have different sectors to look after whenever we frame our policies. We have the conflicting interests of the farmers on one side, the poorer sections on one side, the trade, commerce and industry on the other side. When I talk in this environment of Taj Palace Hotel in front of you, I should also keep into account people living in the far-flung areas of Madhya Pradesh who are malnourished, who can't have 2 square meals a day, who are not very literate, and who do not have any job. There are some tribal communities whose population is now decreasing instead of increasing. We have to take into account that they have to be taken care of. Policies and programs have to be framed so that their interests are taken care of. I think it is not easy to push reforms in a democratic setup. Number of times people compare this country with China. Both came into the present form almost at the same time. In fact, just outside the hall, Jairam was talking to me about the progress that China has made over the last 50 years. But then I put a question to him, would you like to live in China where there is no democracy? Now, this is the moot point. We must understand that when we talk of a democratic setup, we have to understand that the doing business is has to be related to the particular democratic setup of that country, and that's why we have to sort of account for adversarial politics, which is the Indian polity today. It's a peculiar situation in Indian politics today, where we have a national government, which is a coalition of 24 political parties, where half of the states are now being controlled by Congress party. This is an ideal opportunity where a national consensus can emerge. In fact, I have been talking about this for a long time with Honorable Prime Minister, with my friend Arun, that this is a time when we should put aside our political differences and let us come to a political consensus on a national agenda, which does not really cuts across party lines. In fact, Honorable Prime Minister has been very keen on this issue, and he did call a meeting of the chief ministers. But I think the initiative has to be taken by inviting the central leadership at the national level, so that on a common agenda, let us decide some of the issues which you should take them aside from politics. For example, power reforms. We have been pushing the power reforms. In fact, I have been particularly proactive on this, that issues like fiscal discipline, issues like power reforms have to be taken out of the political ambit. It so happens that if I push power reforms, although I had a memorandum of understanding with Government of India, but when I pushed my power reforms in my state, the BJP, which is in opposition, started agitation against me. Similarly, when in Andhra Pradesh, Mr. Chandrababu Naidu pushed economic power reforms, the Congress opposition party there led an agitation. So I think there are some issues on which a national consensus has to be evolved, and the initiative has to be taken by Honorable Prime Minister, and he's certainly making an effort. One of the major issues today is that of corruption. I think corruption is there, although with a different degree in every society, in every country. The initiative has to be taken by going through electoral reforms, and I would also go to the extent of saying that government should consider. Arun is here. I would like him to speak on that also. How we can tackle this menace of corruption? Can we initiate the process by government spending on elections, government funding political parties, recognized political parties to fight elections? I think until unless that is taken care of, we will not be able to deal corruption in its right perspective. The other issue is the accountability. I have always felt that our constitution and our business rules, service rules, provide too much protection to the civil servants. I have not heard of any action being taken against any civil servant for not doing his job. Action is being taken against people for doing job incorrectly. But if a person has not done his job, he has never been punished. The constitutional protection that has been given probably is something unique for this country. This is something which has to be taken into account as to how we make the civil servant more accountable to the people. When we talk of business in India, let us not forget that India still is basically agriculture-based economy. But over the years, our agriculture productivity has remained stagnant. We have really not paid enough attention to raising the agriculture productivity. In fact, our investment in research and development in agriculture sector has been coming down. This is a matter which is of concern to all of us. And I think this has to be tackled at the national level. At the same time, we also have to decide one way or the other about the use of genetically modified seeds in this country. This is an issue which Government of India has to tackle. Otherwise, what has happened in Gujarat shall happen. Well, some of the enterprising farmers brought BT cotton seed, and they were having they spread it to about 5,000 hectares. Now the Government of India has woken up to say that they should be destroyed. This is something which has to be taken into account, that the agriculture still is the base of our economic growth, and which cannot be ignored. Ever since economic reforms have taken place, the whole set of economists have been divided into two different groups. One is, of course, the pro-reforms, which say that once you go for economic reforms, it will automatically create jobs all over the countryside. But there is a certain section which is also quite vociferous, and which has also got what they say makes a lot of sense, that economic reforms without improving the social indicators will not lead us to anything. Other point which is well taken is that economic reforms should mean creation of more jobs. What we are seeing now is the economic reforms, people are being retrenched and people are losing jobs. Now, this is something which has to be taken into account. If you want to sell economic reforms to the people, if you want to take economic reforms to this logical end, we must create an environment where the economic reforms with creation of more jobs is the end result. I think we must also understand that the nature of reform in a poor country, what has to be a format. You can't only confine yourselves to economic reforms and forget about other reforms. There have to be reforms in the administrative setup. There have to be reforms in the judiciary. There have to be reforms in education, in other sectors also, without which this would not be possible. As I told you earlier, there is a need for greater transparency in the system. We in Madhya Pradesh, one of the first states to, after the Government of India asked us to set up Citizens Charter, we have put up Citizens Charter in the whole state, and we have also brought in the bill for, we did bring in the bill for right to information. But because it was not under the Constitution, the Government of India did not allow us to sort of enforce that. But through administrative action, we did bring about right to information in all departments of the state. I think this is extremely important, because people must realize what they are in for. In fact, I've always felt that you can't really improve the quality of life of the people without looking into the social sectors. In the last decade, we have paid more attention to literacy, that is primary literacy and health indicators, and which has dramatically changed the mindset of the people. In fact, only by bringing a reservation for women in the local bodies elections, we have been able to sort of bring more awareness amongst the people. As far as the economic reforms are concerned, I personally feel that we have to look into the present form of taxation. We have a taxation where Government of India levies certain taxes, the state governments levy certain taxes, and the local bodies also have the right to levy taxes. Why can't we think of a single tax rate or a single tax system by which the whole country, then the taxpayers would be much happier by a system where there is a single tax, single rate and single tax, so that the businessman has to only fill in the has to the responsibility of filing only one forms as far as tax is concerned. The tax that is collected then can be devoluted in a manner which may be decided by a commission to the state and the local bodies. Multifarious taxations in the whole system not only brings inefficient tax system but also breeds corruption. In fact, we have started the process of tax reforms. The state governments have decided to bring about a unified tax rate throughout the country, and we are also moving into a VAT regime. But I certainly feel that we should think that how we can bring in a single tax rate or single tax system in the community. If European nations, such diverse nations can come together and bring about some tax reforms, I think our country can also move in that direction. Sometimes the economically rational decisions appear to be politically irrational, and sometimes politically rational ones seem to be economically irrational. I have always felt that if you take the community into confidence, things people do understand. For example, I've been of the experience that people are not they are prepared to pay taxes. They are willing to pay taxes, but unfortunately, the politicians lack the courage to tax. At the same time, we have brought in the system of charging user fees in the system, but have given them the confidence that the user fees collected from them would be spent by the community itself. For example, in health, our hospitals, government hospitals, no user fees was being charged. So we initiated the process of a Rogi Kalyan Samiti where the user fees were charged and collected by the committee at the hospital and spent by them itself. There was no criticism at all. We've been fighting shy of taxing the agriculture. Now, no political party will ever take a decision of taxing agriculture because of obvious reasons. But we have given these powers of raising the land revenue to the Gram Sabha. If you give the community the right to levy or increase the land revenue or levy a cess on land revenue, there is not much of a criticism because the people are convinced that the money that is being collected from them will be spent in that village. In earlier times, the usual tax system was that the produce, this 1/6 of the produce was collected as a land revenue. Now, if you see today's land revenue rates, they have not changed ever since we became independent. I think no political party or government has gathered the courage to raise land revenue. So I think there is a need to sort of rethink on this, that allow the community to raise taxes, to collect and spend on themselves. I think the country has not done too badly in certain sectors. The telecom sector is one sector which has done exceedingly well, where the rates have come down and the consumer is getting much better deal. What I personally feel is that in power sector, we have not been able to frame the right kind of policies. We've not been able to bring in that kind of transparency and that kind of liberalization in the rules and regulations as we were able to in the telecom sector. Ultimately, I would say that we must understand that economic reforms is necessary for the community, for the people in general. But let us not forget that we must understand what is going to be the impact of economic reforms on the political state of this nation. Ultimately, in a democracy, it is the people who matter, and no political party would ever take a course which would ultimately result in loss of public support and goodwill amongst the people.